Hi, my name is Daniel Presses, and this is a presentation on how UX teams can successfully start working with dev teams. So just a little overview on the presentation. We'll first look at some misconceptions between UX teams and game development teams. We'll talk about a shift in mindset for both groups, then a proposed process so that both teams can work together very efficiently, and some takeaways for both groups to consider. So some misconceptions from the dev team about UX testing and UX teams. First of all is that UX will distort design intentions, that it will somehow influence the way the game is made because we need to have some extra testing and the feedback that they give us will in some way shape the design intentions. This is not true. The UX teams are actually built to ensure that the design goals that the design team originally put out are met. Another common misconception is that UX is just common sense. Not all UX is common sense. Human perception is very complicated, but UX helps get to more actionable conclusions a lot faster than if you were to just test on your own. Some will say that UX is just another opinion, and couldn't be farther from the truth. UX actually doesn't give any opinions. It makes analyses based on research and psychology and sociology about different testing groups and such. Some dev teams will say that there's not enough time or enough money to start UX testing. This is actually very untrue. You could equate this almost to quality assurance testing. If the game ships with critical UX issues, the devs won't achieve what they hope for, the execs won't see money being made, and players get very frustrated with the game. So you could actually argue that it is very important for UX testing to be integrated. And then some dev teams will say, okay, that's a good point, but we can always UX later, right? And this is also far from the truth because UX tends to be a very big part of the iterative process, and a lot of critical design decisions can be made if you just keep pushing UX testing over to later, which can result in an overall worse experience at the end. A lot of UX teams, if they do their job properly, can also make the iterative process a lot faster as well, so that more iterations can come from the game. Now, some misconceptions from UX teams about game development teams. First, that game development people don't understand user experience and user research. And actually, while they don't have degrees and stuff in psychology and sociology and that kind of thing, designers understand what good game design is and how to be accessible to players. They're just more worried about putting the game together and making sure that they have a good experience before they allocate space to think about UX. Some other teams will say that devs aren't interested in UX, and devs are interested in working with as many tools as possible to make the game as good as it can be, but sometimes UX teams provide feedback that is way too detailed and way too thorough for the stage of development of the game that the team is working on, and most of the time it's just that they don't have enough time working together, so they haven't established a good working relationship with each other. Some UX teams will say that UX doesn't really require extra time, that they can generate all the reports themselves and everything. That can become true as time progresses, but in the beginning it always takes more time because you have to educate the devs on good UX practices, you have to allocate times for research and testing, etc., etc. So it needs to be very well integrated into the testing schedule, and that can take up a lot more time than whatever dev teams were normally using before. And then a lot of UX teams will say, oh, it's very easy to implement UX feedback. It's just a matter of priority, right? But a lot of the tasks that the UX people give need to be weighed against other priority tasks, and they need time to be spent on them, right? So while it may be easy, it might just be changing some text areas or something. It tends to be very time consuming in the fact that you have to make a task for it and actually go and implement it and test it and everything. And they have to weigh that against other tasks that may take more priority than whatever feedback the UX people have given them. So a shift in mindset for new UX teams starting to work with game development teams are that usually you're the new people, you're the ones who have to adapt to the people that you're working with. So one good thing to start off with would be to make small, quick wins and don't over criticize everything that the dev team is doing right away. So in other words, don't become the UX police. Don't just become another authority that reports to the executives or the people running the actual development of the game. Another thing to keep in mind is that you need to tailor your reports for the development teams so that you can actually gain useful feedback and be able to get more design insight from the devs, give it to them in a digestible way, Don't overwhelm them with pages and pages and pages of reports and statistics and analyses that they probably don't have time to go through. A great example of this is what the user research team for the Destiny 1 game used, what they called contextual feedback. So a data miner would have controller keybinds for players to report when they felt lost or confused, when they felt frustrated, or when they felt awesome, or they encountered something extra fun. This would be kind of similar to pausing a game after a mission and asking questions about how they felt and what they thought about the game, but they couldn't do that in Destiny 1 because it wasn't feasible. They couldn't pause the game since the game wouldn't actually pause in the background. So they had this kind of system where they could press a button and it would send a message to the game about different feelings in different areas of the game. When the controller keybind is used, a data miner would log all the possible stats about their player, the position, the weapons that they had, everything, and you would be able to import that data into level editors later, which was a very good visualization tool for designers and programmers to make sure that everything is going well. And then another thing to keep in mind is that you need to allow devs to view but not interfere with the testing. Devs shouldn't be the one actually testing the game when conducting user research because it's very difficult to remove biases. But allowing devs to view them and actually see what's happening is a very good way to allow them to see the feasibility and the usability of the UX feedback that you give them. Another great example that the user research team on Destiny used was that they streamed playtests from their lab to the dev studio, which was convenient for the designers and programmers and other devs to see the playtests happening. And it prevented crowding in the playtest lab, so the playtesters felt more comfortable. And they included face cams of the playtesters, which helped to humanize the data and see players' reactions to certain interactions in the game. Now we can talk about a shift in mindset for devs working with UX teams. First big thing is that devs need to recognize that UX feedback is very neutral and scientific. It tends to be the least bias of the feedback that others want to give them because execs will want to bias it so that they make more money, and designers will want to bias it so the game is more on their vision of the game, of what they want the game to be. User experience feedback tends to be more neutral and more unbiased and more based on the testing and research that they've done. The next thing is that UX needs to be a priority for everyone. So everyone on the team needs to have UX feedback as a priority rather than keeping it away until later. And you need to allow the UX team to have closeness with the people on the team so that everyone knows what's going on, but they need to have distance from the product itself so that they don't start generating biases the way the dev team or the execs would. So a suggested process is starting to work together and establishing a good relationship between the two teams. So step by step, first of all, generate a hypothesis to make sure everyone is up to date on what needs to be done, on what needs to be worked on, and what's the next thing to do. You would start a planning phase with the game development team on when you can start actually testing different features. Once you have a plan in place, you can start setting up a test, make sure the features you want to test are working and usable, a specific build that you want to test, etc. And then you would move on to the actual test itself, where you allow the devs to watch the test as it's happening without allowing them to interfere, like I mentioned before. After that, you would generate your report, so make sure it has a consistent and a concise way of reporting. Mention the scope, the criteria, some key insights, what competitors are doing in the same space, the different kinds of people that came into the test, the feedback on the actual product itself, and whatever actionable next steps could be considered. Then you would need to have a meeting with the team to talk about new tasks that can be made. And then once the UX feedback is integrated into different tasks, have some next steps so that you can let the UX know how they can start retesting or testing different features and then start the process all over again. So some takeaways for both sides to consider. First of all, don't be afraid of each other. The better that both teams can work with each other, the faster we can start making the process of iteration and starting to test with each other. Start small, try to demonstrate quick wins in small areas so that everyone gets a good idea of what the UX is good for. Don't become the UX police. Don't become an authority that's on everyone's case about what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done, and just annoying everyone about different issues. And establish a good process for working together. Thank you for listening.